So our first question this evening is, for course selection, I need to choose between AP Computer Science A and AP Human Geography. It doesn't matter which one I take if I'm not going to be a computer science major. So let's answer that part first because there's a follow-up part about the summer plans. So first of all, for that, I mean, there are a lot of things to consider. I would say maybe like try to figure out what the reputation is for the teachers in those classes, and what the rest of your grades look like, right? Because if you're not necessarily a straight A student, you might want to just go for AP Human Geo because it's going to be potentially an easier AP in most cases, and an easier way to get an A, right? So if you're worried about the GPA factor, that might be okay. For AP Computer Science, though, if let's say you're a straight A student and you're pretty confident you can answer or you can cover all that stuff, then I would maybe suggest just going for AP Computer Science A because even now in the business world, a little bit of rudimentary coding is still really going to be helpful, down the line, right? So I think as far as like some practical use goes, just to kind of give you more versatility, especially if you're going to go in, like what you said, like business or potentially sports management, it's not a bad thing to have in your toolkit, in my opinion. Okay. Next is the follow-up for that is as a major in sports business and a minor in STEM, I'll be attending the LMU, Loyola Marymount Global Sports Program this summer, which is a good, solid program. It's one of the few that actually focuses on that aspect of business. What else should I do in this summer? Well, I guess you would want to consider the rest of your profile, right? So if you still feel like you need to increase your test scores, I would probably go ahead and take a test prep class during the summer. If you feel like your GPA isn't exactly perfect, so the LMU program is a 2-week course. You could probably even juggle that alongside an online college class, especially one that is an asynchronous college class, just to get an extra couple of grades in there. And then, if those are, not things you necessarily need, maybe a summer job would actually be a good idea, especially if you're going to be going into sports business. It doesn't have to be sports related. Okay. Some other summer job where you get to understand like the nature of things like customer service, I think would be probably pretty solid for you. Okay. Next, if a student is not satisfied with the college they apply to, can they transfer to another university and how do you do it? So yes, you definitely can. Generally speaking, if you transfer during your first year, in other words, you're applying to then transfer as a sophomore, oftentimes colleges will still look at your high school transcript and not your high school performance. Okay. If you apply as a junior transfer, there's more grades in the books. They will probably be evaluating you based on how you did in your college, right? Not all colleges do that, but I think many do, right? I know the UCs, if you're a junior transfer, they will only look at your performance during college, which I guess would make sense because if you're not quite satisfied with where you went to college, it's probably because it wasn't necessarily as competitive enough or high enough. So those are things that you would want to consider before you decide to transfer. Now, if all else fails, if you do have a longer term plan, you might want to consider just toughing it out at the college that you got to. If you're not satisfied because of the name brand or the reputation, or the ranking, you can always do grad school or you can do professional school. Those things can be done afterwards because at the end of the day, if you're going to be going to med school, law school, business school, the undergrad, yes, is important, but it's not nearly as important as what your terminal degree is, right? So the question then becomes, why are you not satisfied with it? If you feel like socially and emotionally you're not fitting into the college that you went to, of course, then that's probably legitimate reasons why you would want to go ahead and transfer to feel like you want to be in an environment where you're adequately challenged. Okay. Next is what can we do for the UC waitlist? Only wait. Yeah, unfortunately, these days, a lot of the UCs are making it so that you cannot submit anything. They explicitly say you can't accept recommendations, which the UCs don't anyway. They're test blind, so additional tests won't help. So the reality is, yeah, I mean, it is just a little bit of a waiting game. Now, on the bright side, other than, of course, maybe Berkeley and UCLA, a lot of the other UCs do have a fairly good chance of getting off the wait list. Some schools, for instance, have as high as like 30 or 40% chance of getting off the wait list, just because, obviously the UCs, a lot of people will just apply to the whole system. They're not going to go to every single one of them. So there are going to be spots up for grabs. So I would say just be patient, play the waiting game, and hopefully you can snag one of those spots, especially if you're hoping to get off the wait list from one of the UCs. Okay. Next is how should top debaters best present their debate achievements to non-debate admissions readers? Yeah, that's often a tricky thing because debate's such a specialized field, especially if you're doing like circuit debate, like the TOC level debate, because most admissions people won't necessarily know that, they will know things like, oh, your state championships or your nationals, right? So I think that's why it's best explained in an essay. It could be explained also if you're getting a recommendation letter from your debate coach, because then, the letter will have more room to sort of contextualize your debate achievements, right? I would also say use things that you can find that would allow them to see the scope of the achievement, right? You could say like, oh, I'm ranked 15th, but out of like 1,600 Lincoln Douglas debaters or something like that. So they have a better understanding of what that means. Okay. I would also try to reach out to the coaches of whatever universities you're applying to, because even if, let's say, it's not an explicit recruitment situation where they're trying to get you in for debate, maybe they can help give some information to the admissions office about just how significant your achievements are, so that they have a better appreciation of what you're able to accomplish in your activity. And of course, this translates to most other activities as well. This is not just specific to debate, right? Same would be true if you do things like DECA or FBLA, right? Okay, next is what makes an applicant's personal project or unique project truly stand out in Ivy League applications just beyond community service? Well, of course, one pathway is to do community service, or just have like if you want to do some sort of nonprofit project, I think that would be important. What makes it stand out is really kind of like the scope and level of the impact, I would say, right? It's not just that you have a nonprofit on paper. They want to see that there's some meaningful progress being made, right? So if you're doing something that has grown nationally, I think that's a good metric in terms of breadth and or scope, right? That's one thing. But depth is also pretty important. So even if your nonprofit or your volunteer project that you're doing is only at a local level or even at a school level, but the impact that you made is pretty substantial, then I think that's definitely going to also get the attention of admissions people, right? So if, let's say, for example, you're local, you're raising money locally for something and you managed to do a lot of things, or you managed to raise a lot of money, but it's only at your local community level, I think that could also be very significant if it's able to solve like real community issues or real community problems. Okay. Next is Georgetown University has changed to use the Common App. Will it mean more applications for this university? Most likely, yes. Okay, but probably not like significantly, because Georgetown's already a fairly big name brand among colleges. So yeah, I mean, there are going to be some students that, just because of the ease of them being able to apply to Georgetown without having to have another application, yeah, it's going to invite a few more applications. The same was true when U Chicago joined the Common App, a couple of decades ago. When USC did it about a decade ago, right? There's been an increase. There's been a decided increase in terms of the number of applications to those schools, and there's also been, of course, a drop in the acceptance rates. So that's probably inevitable to some degree, right? Next, for a personal project, does it need to expand into multiple chapters or scale significantly to demonstrate real impact? What level of scale or influence do top schools consider meaningful? Like I said, you know, it can be something if it's like at a statewide or national level, that could be impressive, but it can also be impressive, like I said, if it really does solve meaningful problems, even at a smaller scale level, even if it doesn't scale, in a very big way, or you have multiple chapters and stuff. If your nonprofit or personal project has had significant accomplishments or is like award winning, right? So you're just looking for metrics in which you can show the admissions people like the actual impact of what you've done. I think a good way to complement that is by maybe getting a recommendation letter that would also show the more qualitative impacts of what you've done, as opposed to just pure numbers in terms of like, I have X number of people in my nonprofit or something like that, right? So it's really more about like being able to demonstrate what you've done in terms of meaningful impact or meaningful change. Okay. Next is for HS2 students who got accepted in Caltech, did they apply REA or RD? Are they athletes? What qualities do they think they have that are particularly suited for Caltech? I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but just off of recent memory from a couple of my students who got in, it was through regular decision, right? I don't know as many people who are applying REA to Caltech, because it used to be that Caltech did have a pure EA, so you could apply to both Caltech and MIT. But in recent years, with them changing it to make it a restricted early action, I think there've been fewer HS2 students who really decidedly have Caltech as their dream school and want to, pick them as their only EA, right? So I think that's why it's a little bit rare. But yeah, I think off of recent memory, the last couple that we had went for regular decision. Are they athletes? No, I don't think they were. But even if they did, Caltech would be Division 3, which means the actual athletic recruitment probably is not going to have a meaningful impact in terms of the recruitment to Caltech. Caltech's not exactly also known as a powerhouse for many sports, so I don't think athletics is necessarily a big hook for you for Caltech necessarily. What qualities do they have? I think research these days is being like touted as a really big thing that Caltech is looking for. So exceptional achievement in research, or just like very, deep commitment to your particular field that you're going for STEM, right? Showing that you're very much interested and you're doing a lot of things to advance your qualification for it. Okay. Does top universities like applicants who have at least one paid job, then volunteering and research? Different stripes, you know what I mean? Like some colleges would like to see that, sure, but it's not a consistent thing. So it's one way to impress them, right? So, but it's not necessarily the only thing. I guess it just depends on the impact of what it is you're doing, right? So if the paid job that you're doing shows a lot of responsibility, and or contextually, if you're doing that because your family needs the extra support, I think that would obviously have a good narrative to it. Okay. However, if the volunteering and or the research is also substantial in its own right, then you have to weigh each opportunity. You cannot simply find these things and say like paid job is always better than research or volunteering, right? It depends contextually on what it is that you're doing within those activities, I think, to be honest, right? So top universities would scrutinize that and say like, okay, well, we understand why this person decided to spend the whole summer working because they wanted to get a deeper understanding of like business practices, or they need to raise money for this reason or that reason to help out their family. I think those would all be pretty good reasons to have on there. But it really all, like I said, depends. Okay. Next is for the list of HS2 students who've gotten to top schools, approximately how many of them got into multiple schools? How many students actually represented in the list? I mean, of course, right. We're not going to have students that only got into one college, but these days it's becoming increasingly rare to get students accepted into like 7 or 8 or 9 top schools, like Ivy level schools, right? It just rarely happens anymore unless the student is truly, truly exceptional. Even top students who will sometimes get like a Harvard or a Stanford, they'll be rejected still to many top Ivies and stuff. That's just the way it goes, unfortunately, these days. So yeah, absolutely, right? So, when we have a list of colleges, there's going to be some that get accepted to some other colleges as well. That's just natural, right? But not quite as, it's not like, there's one person who accounts for like 9 of the schools or anything like that. That just doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. Okay. Next, Princeton's written English paper is 11th grade teacher better than 12th grade English teacher. I don't think it really matters. Just really pick which one best demonstrates your actual writing ability, and like which one has like comments that you think best reflect your talent or abilities as a writer. Okay. Next, do you have AMC 10 training? I think we did a while back. I'm not sure if we currently do. I'll have to take a look at the current schedule, but I don't believe so, not off the top of my head. Okay. Next, is early college programs in high school good for college applications? It can be, right? Because you're showing a lot of initiative to do things above and beyond what your normal high school curriculum would be. But in and of itself, it's something that like you can't control, I guess. So sure, taking advantage of it would be similar to like you taking AP classes at like your high school, but not all high schools have an early college program. So it's not a decidedly huge advantage, because they know other high school students who don't have that opportunity wouldn't necessarily, they're not going to give it as much of a bonus, but they will view it contextually as like, hey, you taking early college courses, it's college courses. They will be weighing it in terms of the overall rigor, okay, not inherently just because you have an early college. Next is UC Merced's location has been concerned, but its rankings have improved a lot in recent years. Would you please comment on if it's a better choice than UC Riverside for SoCal resident? I would honestly just make the decision based on like major, based on the strength of each major. Sure, UC Merced has been going up in the rankings in recent years, but let's say, for example, you're going for certain things that Merced doesn't have. Like they don't really have much of a robust engineering program these days. UC Riverside just added a medical school. It just depends really on what the offerings are. Okay. And oftentimes, in many cases, you probably apply to both anyway, and you can then determine based on fit, you can visit both campuses and try to see which one offers you the best possible education. All right. So, our last question for the evening then. If my swim times are only good enough for D3 schools, would top universities that are D1 Consider my involvement in swimming without recruitment for admissions? Sure. Okay. So even if they don't recruit you, it's viewed still as kind of like your talent or ability. Obviously, it moves the needle more. It's going to impact it more if they're actually recruiting you for a certain sport. But yeah, I mean, in some sports there are walk-ons. I guess maybe that's a little bit of a plus, but not necessarily. It's all relative, right? So, the more badly they want you for recruiting, the more impact or the more that's going to move the needle, obviously, in terms of your overall admissions chances to the school. So if your times aren't quite good enough to their level, but they're like, okay, well, I mean, you showed commitment for 3 or 4 years in varsity and had pretty decent times, they will factor that much like they would any strong activity, but not to the point where, yes, recruitment is a different story if they're actually trying to recruit you. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Great questions. Very well rounded